Hello and welcome to this month's episode of Intentionally Act Live. Today, we're going to be talking about data. Specifically, what do we do with data? And, in particular, we're talking about data on Black women in the workplace. So, what's behind this? Well, measuring DEI is notoriously difficult, but we do have a lot of data in some areas of diversity, for example, on women in leadership. So, what are those numbers telling us, and how can we use them to help us achieve our DEI goals? To give us a concrete basis for our discussion today, we're looking at McKinsey's Women in the Workplace report from 2022 and Gallup's Black Women in the Workplace report from 2021. So, what's in it for you? By digesting the data that are telling us about women in the workplace, we can gain valuable insight into what we can do to ensure that our organizations, and specifically their leadership teams, reflect the employees that they are composed of. By starting with a broader category of diversity, we can start to parse the needs of the identities that exist within those broader identity groups, such as women, and in particular, Black women. If we ever hope to achieve pay equity between men and women in the workplace, we need to get a clearer picture of what's going on. So, to really drill down into this topic, we'll also be taking a look at the experiences of Black women to see what actions we could meaningfully take to work toward the kind of progress that so many organizations have committed to, but seem to have trouble achieving. With us today to talk about this topic are Chief of Strategy and Project Management, Janifa Fortune, who joined us the last time we talked about Black women leaders with our colleague Octavia Chambers in March of 2022. That's a year ago. Excuse me. And we'll post a link in the comments to that episode if you haven't seen it. Also joining us is Communications Manager Janine Williamson. And, unfortunately, our colleague Moses was not able to join us today. So, Moses, hope you'll be feeling better soon. So, Jennifer and Janine, how are you today?
Doing well. Excited to dive into this conversation with the both of you. Sending well wishes to Moses, hoping he's feeling better.
Yeah, I am also doing well. I'm feeling well rested today. Happy about having this conversation. And as I mentioned earlier, it's been a while since I've been in conversation with you, Rico. So good to be here.
Yeah, I think we were looking over just before the show went live, and it was over a year ago, which is kind of unbelievable. But time is just flying. So glad to be in space with both of you once again. So to kind of dive in here, we're gonna set the scene a little bit. So I want to pop this up on the screen, right? And we can see this is drawn from that Gallup article that I mentioned at the top. And what it says, if it's a little small for you, is Black women are the least likely to say their organization is fair to everyone, that they have the same opportunities for advancement, and that their employer would address issues of ethics and integrity. Right. So we can see the numbers here a little bit, and we can see that, indeed, Black women are the least likely. However, if we take a look at the other identity categories, none of them are especially high, which should be indicative of several things here. But if we're looking at this data in particular, right? So, McKinsey, on the other hand, is saying that women leaders are leaving their companies in greater numbers than expected in recent years. And we're also pairing it with this finding from Gallup that Black women are like the least likely to feel valued, respected, and that there's fair treatment in the workplace. So these are not shocking revelations to those of us in the DEI field, but there are a lot of people that they'll see this data and they'll be surprised by it. So what do you make of that? What's happening in the workplace that is causing Black women to feel this way, or women more broadly to feel this way?
Yeah, I'm a focus on, women of color, Black women specifically. When looking at this data, this piece around not feeling valued or acknowledged, or their work not being acknowledged, like we have to first and foremost talk about the truth that Black women are doing a lot within their organizations, from frontline employees to the C-suite. They are doing a lot, and that work despite the quality of that work, it's not being recognized to the extent that it ought to be recognized. And burnout is real. So they're not just meeting the marker for their responsibilities, but they're doing over and beyond and not being recognized for that. And so, we have Black women who are expected to show up and fulfill the responsibilities tied to their job descriptions, while also expected to show up and lead DEI efforts specifically. We are bringing Black women into C-suite leadership roles and expecting them to literally transform an entire organization that is hanging on by a string, or that has been challenged with markers related to being a toxic workplace for all of its employees, right? So we're expecting Black women to clean up decades of work as part of their, new leadership role or new executive leadership role. And none of that is fully acknowledged or recognized. In addition to that, there is this element of, despite a Black woman being in a C-suite role or a frontline employee, the range of microaggressions that they are forced to deal with regularly is pretty horrendous, right? It does not matter how long a Black woman has been in an organization. It does not matter the number of years of experience that she has under her. It does not matter whether she's, an executive director or a CEO of an organization. She's still being forced to deal with microaggressions from the hands of those who work with her, those who she must report to, whether it be a board of directors, or even those who are asking her to, support them in the sense of a client and vendor relationship, right? So Black women are dealing with these microaggressions despite their leadership level within an organization. And then finally, they're not getting the support that they need, particularly from their direct managers. So that support is not coming in the sense of, hey, I see what you're doing. You're doing amazing work. And I also see that you need help. So let me know how I can support you. Nor is it coming in the sense of, hey, you're up for this promotion given all the work that you've put forth, or we recognize that you have been in this particular role for a while. And although you haven't mentioned wanting to move up in leadership roles, we're seeing your value in this new place. Are you interested, right? So managers are not being taking more initiative around how they're supporting Black women, and certainly not fully regarding the challenges that Black women are bringing up to them. So the data is real. The data is not surprising, because Black women have been and continue to be suffering, again, despite their leadership or their experiences.
So just to try to crystallize some of this for our audience here, part of what you were describing was, like in general, we've seen that there are more and more organizations that are saying, yes, we are dedicated to diversity, equity, inclusion. We want to make sure that Black women are part of that leadership. Once they get them in there, or, even if they're just getting their foot in the door of the organization, this organization that's committed to all of these seemingly great things, they still carry that baggage that was responsible for those dynamics in the first place. And so in the course of trying to achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion, they are, capitalizing on diversity, yes, but the equity and inclusion pieces are lagging behind. Is that fair to say? And it seems to be pulling unfairly on certain people that unfortunately have already, suffered the compounding harms of racism and other identities all at once. Even outside these roles. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a really good assessment of and summary of some of the points that Jennifer made. I think it's those bad practices and those toxic cultural things that were happening before don't go away unless you're intentional about co-creating culture with the people that you are bringing in or that you're trying to rise up in the organization. So if you have that opportunity and you're thinking about it from a perspective of like data, the data that we're seeing here, are these things that can be measured? Are these things that you can incorporate into the measurement of your employee experience? Are you talking to Black women about their promotions? If you're a manager, are you having regular conversations with your people and asking them about like, well, tell me about what your career goals are. Help me understand how you want to grow, and then putting things in place so that you're able to do that, like mentorship programs or executive sponsors. Or are you a manager? Have you been given the management skills and the management training to actually coach that person? I think too often, what you mentioned earlier, that a lot of women are leaving the corporate world, especially a lot of Black women. And I think what I've heard and what I've also experienced myself is that you work so hard to get to that point of promotion, right? You're doing the extra work, like Jennifer said, you're staying late, but you're not getting recognized. Years maybe go by while you're watching other people get promoted that aren't doing that extra work, that aren't doing the additional work of fighting those microaggressions, right? Like that aren't, straightening their hair so that they're seen as professional, that aren't, making sure that their tone is right and doing all of that code switching on a regular basis so people don't see them as the angry Black woman. All of those things add up. And as you're watching other people that might not be as qualified as you move up the corporate ladder, you're feeling that, you're not valued. And then what happens if you do finally get recognized, right? Like you're given the title, but are you given the agency and the power to actually make change and to do the work of someone at a director level or a C-suite level? I think oftentimes people are given those titles, but they're not really given the opportunity to have decision-making power. They're not provided the necessary resources to get the work done with that leadership title that they've been given and be actually effective at doing that job. So it's like you're really swimming upstream and like you finally get acknowledged and you get the title, but you don't have the power. And I think that's very disheartening. It is definitely impacting the wellness and well-being of Black women to just know that, like, okay, well, you worked this hard, you finally got recognized, but you don't have the power to actually do a good job at what you've been, really striving to do for the organization. I think there's also a little bit to say about women and the fact that like we are often disproportionately also the caregivers, right? Do organizations have policies around flexibility for that? And if your organization is someone that's still keeping with that theme of remote work, if I am that caregiver and I need that flexibility and I need to stay remote, does that stop me from being able to have like stretch projects? Does that stop me from being able to be considered for things that are going to align me with promotion in the future? And so I think that's an impact as well.
Can I just really emphasize on this point around it was a couple of points, but I want to merge them together that Janine just talked about. So this point around the importance of coaching, particularly managers coaching their employees, right? So Team All Aces, oftentimes we have organizations who come to us needing some type of training, specifically skill building for their managers, because there is essentially this frozen middle that happens amongst women of color and Black women, where, perhaps we've moved up the tier from frontline employee to higher, but not yet quite director role, or not yet quite senior manager role, right? And we know that oftentimes in these organizations, Black women are complaining about their manager's skillability or their manager's capabilities, right? And so if you're an organization that's trying to think of how to improve your management tier, you need to think about the importance of coaching. It is really critical that managers approach their or include in their management style, include coaching as part of their approach, right? Because coaching, for one, it's not about me telling you what to do based off of my understanding of the job description, right? It is more placing your leadership development in your hands, and me creating the environment for that leadership to flourish, right? So I'm helping you take a step back and think about the challenges and barriers that are before you, and I'm allowing you to identify how you want to address those barriers, right? And I'm providing the resources to do it, but I'm not telling you what to do, particularly not from my perspective. And I'm also ensuring that as I am trying to cultivate the environment for your leadership to flourish, I'm really honing in on this point that Janine made around decision-making power, right? Like, I'm really honing in on your agency and your autonomy. That is very critical in the workplace, right? Because oftentimes the agency and the autonomy isn't there, but yet I'm doing all the work behind the scenes, right? Or the agency and autonomy is not there, but when it's convenient to you, you're picking my brain. So this point around developing managers is a really critical one if we're trying to truly be transformative in how we support Black women and their leadership progression.
Mm. Yeah. So it sounds like, yes, we do have some data on how women in leadership positions are doing, how Black women in organizations are doing. But it sounds like, some of those numbers might be a little bit muddy because, for example, if you're giving somebody a leadership position, but it's in name only, then when you're measuring for how effective leaders are, or the behaviors of leaders, if they're not actually leaders, if they're only leaders in name, then how accurate are those measurements, frankly? So I guess one thing on my mind is, if we're thinking of these organizations, that have committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, to changing their mindsets, right? So what would each of your hopes be for these organizations when it comes to shifting their mindset around measurement in particular?
For me, it's this necessity around understanding that the moment we remain comfortable with the status quo, we have eliminated ourselves from truly advancing equity, right? Preserving status quo in our structure, in our processes, in our behavior, it's easier. And so we can collect all the data we want. We can add metrics to what we're doing. All of that doesn't do anything to the actual structures or processes that are in place. So my hope is that we actually be intentional about changing our structures, changing our processes, which ultimately changes our culture, because that's where transformation lives. So hardcore example, one metric that many organizations have as one of their priority metrics around DEI is representation, right? And so we have organizations that, if you look at executive level, C-suite level tiers, they are majority white and lack people of color, lack women of color, and certainly lack Black women. And so they have as a priority metric to get more Black women and women of color in these leadership roles. And so part of doing that or accomplishing that is looking externally and trying to think about how they can improve their recruitment strategies or where they should be looking to bring Black women into leadership. But yet, if you look at their organization, they actually have Black women and women of color in more frontline employee roles, or as I mentioned, in those middle management roles that are frozen in the middle. But this act of looking externally is a lot easier than looking internally and asking ourselves, oh, we have all of these women of color and Black women in these lower tiers, and they actually have been telling us that they want to see themselves in these leadership roles and executive leadership roles that we're hiring. So, what about our pipeline or our promotion process is not making that happen? Like, what is standing as a barrier, right? And so, to take a step back and have to do something like look at the markers within our performance management system that is tied to promotion and even compensation, to have to look at the markers that make up that system, or better yet, to have to reevaluate the entire system. That's hard work, right? And that is that culture shift. That's the actual changing of structure and processes that needs to happen for us to genuinely achieve the representation numbers that we need, and do so in a way where Black women feel valued throughout the process, as opposed to being the person who was external, brought in through some type of strategy and then expected to fix a broken system or a couple of broken systems.
It also kind of strikes me that when organizations do that thing, when they aren't critical, when they aren't reflective and thinking about their own existing structures and processes and the personnel that they already have on staff, it becomes this weird kind of like, you know, act of acquisition, right? Like, ooh, we had to find some really good Black women out there. Like, that's super creepy, man. Like, why? Not necessary, like, and also it kind of cheapens the idea of value, right? The value of this person is their gender, is their race. They can fill a role that I have. That's so reductive, right? Rather than looking inward and saying, hey, you've been with us for a while. We've been learning and growing together. Oh, I see that you've developed some great skills that we can definitely leverage. Like, one feels, like an organization I would want to be part of, and the other feels like one that I would want to run from, frankly.
And it's accountability, right? Because we can bring in a Black woman. She realizes, oh, there's a whole lot here that I actually don't want to be part of or attempt to fix, because this is just so deeply rooted, and leave. And then that leaves leadership. Well, we tried to bring the woman in, and she left. And so at least we did our part. It's like an easy to get out. Like, no, you didn't do your part. Like, she actually showed you that she put up a mirror and showed you that this isn't working. So yeah, it also like restricts this level of accountability that we need to have when it comes to our internal structures and processes.
Absolutely. And by the way, if you're part of an organization, leader of an organization, kind of reflecting in the moment, saying, yeah, you know what, we have hired a bunch of people of color, women of color, and they haven't stayed very long. Guess what? That's a metric too. Over to you, Janine.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail right on the head, Jennifer, and exactly what you just said, Rico. If we are going through the process as an organization and seeing the gap between the numbers and the representation, but we're not going to that next level of seeing, like, well, why is that gap there? You have to look at the data from like a qualitative standpoint, but also from a qualitative standpoint, right? What's the story underneath the data? What's the story underneath the numbers? And oftentimes I think that people don't take the time to do that. I think when we were talking earlier about like the success of that person, sure, go ahead and hire a Black woman and give her a leadership role, but it's, again, it's a vanity title if she's not set up for success, if the organization around her isn't really open to co-creating that culture with her and giving her the power and the agency. The pay, I think, is another part about it too. Like, if you are taking the time to understand and do a really review around your pay and transparency around pay, that also is a big flag for understanding your data. And where is that pay gap showing up in your organization? So looking at it from that perspective too, but also knowing that, like, just because I hire a Black woman, just because I have a two-parent household doesn't mean that the mom and the dad are equal, right? That doesn't mean that there are equality in all aspects of that, just because that representation is there. So giving that leader the power and giving creating those processes around coaching, creating those processes around understanding, like, okay, I'm going to grow this individual. I'm going to show them how to understand their strengths and give them the power to start working with me on a regular basis to really show those opportunities and creating those opportunities within the organization. Then the numbers don't matter. Like, that person's not going to stay. So how can you create those processes and strategies within your organization so that it's not just filling a gap with a number, but also doing the things that you need to do to change your processes and change your culture?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it also strikes me that there are a number of metrics that people like to gravitate toward in diversity work, usually on the organizational side. But a lot of these metrics are really related to maintaining the status quo, right? It's like more like, well, how's the ship doing, rather than like, how are things progressing? Where are our pain points from this growth that we've been experiencing? And in some sense, it's like how you approach reading the data also affects what you're able to do with it.
Mm.
So I don't know if either of you have anything on that, but
Yeah. I like that. I like that you bringing that up, because it's like, are you collecting the data to just check a box and be like, look, we did the thing and we see our numbers and here they are, sharing them with the people? Like, that's not enough. You can't just
right.
collect the data. It should be collecting data that you know is going to be rooted in helping people understand each other, helping to
Hmm.
create change, helping to find those pathways for people to grow and to evolve in the organization. It's not just about like, well, how are we doing? Let's just collect the data that shows that we're doing good. You have to really make sure that your purpose and your intention is around making change. It's not just about collecting data to show that, like, you have a checkbox, you did it, you did the report. No, it's more than that.
Yeah, as you're talking there, Janine, it strikes me as like we've all had performance reviews and we've all experienced that dread of having a terrible performance review. Maybe not because you perform badly, but because you know that the data that they've collected on you is to see if you were staying within the lines, if you were doing what you were supposed to do, if you were being obedient, essentially. And then there's performance reviews that are like, yeah, we're seeing that you're growing in all these different ways. What can we do? What can we do with that? How can we continue this growth together, right? And those are two very different kind of feelings. I think Jennifer, you were about to break in here.
Yeah, I was just going to mention this is why I do appreciate one of the services we offer, which is to assess an organization. Because I mean, even in that process of collecting data, assessing an organization, and giving them all of this qualitative data back and painting a picture for them on the employee experience within their organization. Um, part of our process from the beginning is coming to an agreement with leadership that once the data has been collected, we have painted the picture for them through a report that we deliver. There is some plan in place to share this with the wider organization and bring employees into the process of identifying priorities, because the reports we deliver, they can carry an organization for a couple of years, right, given all of the things that come to the surface. And typically after that, it's like, okay, so what do we do with the data? Well, we have to prioritize. We can't tackle everything all at once. And so part of our process is being clear of like, okay, once this report is delivered, when will it be shared with employees, and how will they be brought into the process of identifying the priorities that need to be addressed immediately versus down the road. And so every time we're in space with employees during the collection process, we are letting them know of the big picture process so that they don't feel like we're just coming in, collecting this data, producing a report that they never see, never get their eyes on, and even worse, never see action come from it either.
Mhm.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was within the last couple of years where we actually had a couple clients who were somewhat reluctant to share the data that we found with their organization, and it was kind of a struggle, if I'm remembering correctly, to communicate to this organization how important it was for the employees to be looped in so that they could actually take part in this process. Am I remembering that correctly, Jennifer?
Yeah, so the issue was let the leadership having this tension of, as opposed to us just sharing with the wider organization this data, why don't we figure out what to do with this? So essentially, like, why don't we prioritize without them first, so that when we share the data, we can say, okay, here's the data, here's what we've prioritized, and here's how we're planning to address these things. But like I said, the problem with that is those who shared their experiences aren't part of the planning process. And so, yeah, part of the communication is helping leadership know, like, no, you actually don't have to do the prioritization without your employees. You actually don't have to figure out how to smooth over the challenges that were surfaced, because these are their experiences. So one, they already know it, they're living it. So there's no smoothing.
What? I said that? I can't believe it.
Right, like there's no smoothing that needs to happen. But the where the integrity lies is letting employees see this and allowing employees to see how you are sitting in this. Like, how are you as a leader taking this in? How is it impacting you? What are you now committed to as a result of it? So bringing in this like intentional collective reflection is part of the process, and often what we have to really help our client organizations understand, like, before you even get to action plan, let's just collectively reflect about this. I'm not saying let it be the thing that keeps us still for 6, 8, 12 months. No, but let's collectively reflect and really have some time to think about, like, wow, it was a different experience to actually read the experiences that people are having and read things that I'm not witnessing on a day-to-day basis, or read something that I'm not experiencing on a day-to-day basis, right? So to sit in that space of reflection in community with our employees, and then getting to action planning. And also, part of our reframing is helping leaders understand that your employees can also help you brainstorm how to address these challenges, right? Like, they brought up these challenges and they can also help you address them or come up with the ideas for addressing them. I don't think many employees go into these processes saying, I'm telling you all this stuff, now do something with it.
Mm.
It better meet my expectations. No, like,
Mm.
you don't have my experiences. I actually don't expect you to fully understand. I expect you to have foundational knowledge, but I don't expect you to fully even understand.
There are
So
a
we've
couple of things that, Jennifer, that you talked about that I just want to highlight, like pull out a few things. So the first thing was that, you're not just looking at the data as in like numbers don't lie. We have representation. That's all we need to do as far as surveying and as far as measuring and collecting data. No, what you talked about in the All Aces process is that we take the time to look at the numbers, but we also take the time to talk to the people. It's really having that opportunity to have like the data that is behind the numbers. So you're in number one in your data collection process, you're engaging with the people and asking them to share their experience. The second thing you talked about was that like it's not only enough to engage with them in that data collection process, but as you get the reports back and you're looking and you're analyzing about the data that you received, now it's time for you to also engage with your employees. So it's not like one and done. We got them to share, we did the listening tour, we had the conversations. Once you get the report and you see what is coming out and what the trends are, then it's like, okay, let's do this again. Let's go back around to the employees. Let's talk about this inclusion piece that you brought up earlier, Rico. Let's include them in the process, in the next step of the process. So we have the opportunity now to say, okay, this is what came out in the report. Let's talk about it. Let's have some discussion around how we want to develop solutions to this. Let's have that conversation together. And then let's go through the third part of this is like, okay, so now we've had the conversation about what we learned. Now it's coming to the point of coming up with solutions. So the example that you gave us of the executives or the people that we worked with going to the point of being like, okay, we're going to go in the room now and we're going to figure out the solutions, as executives, and then we're going to come back and share it with the people. No, the third part of that is the solution part should also involve your employees. It should also involve a conversation. They have to be a part of it every step of the process. And not only when you get to the point of coming up with the solutions and talking to them, but also in the next step of that too. So when you start implementing some of those things and you've prioritized and you're in the process of implementing your plan, what happens when you run into a roadblock? What happens when you run into a challenge or a problem? You also go back to your employees and say, hey, y'all, like, we're struggling with this thing. We know we prioritize pay transparency and we've worked on doing that, but we came into a challenge, and being honest and transparent and saying, like, what are we missing?
Yeah.
What is it that, like, we all agreed this was a priority, but we ran into a roadblock. Let's go back to you guys. Let's talk about this and have a conversation about solving that challenge together. You don't, just because you're the executive team does not mean you take on all of that load yourself.
Right. Yeah. We do have a question coming in. It's kind of a two-part question, and it's from our former colleague, John Monahan III. So John's asking, what are your thoughts on data transparency, especially when it comes to data literacy? Who gets to see it? How does it get explained? And how it gets used? The second part is you're answering the question. I'll be more specific and ask, what opportunities does data literacy provide leadership and employees to collaborate? Jennifer is talking about sitting in that space of wrangling the data in community.
Yeah, no, I just emphasize that point. So once we've collected the data, one, as leadership, we should be thanking our employees for vulnerably and authentically sharing their experiences, period, right? Because truthfully, there's no need for them to share. Even for us as organization, as a team that goes into organizations, when we are completing an organizational assessment and collecting qualitative data through focus groups, the people who join the focus groups, that's all volunteer based, right? And we recognize that there are going to be people in the organization who strictly say, no, I'm good. I'm not interested in joining this focus group, sharing my experiences, and to see nothing happen because of it. So one, thanking your employee. I think leadership always has an opportunity to be grateful and thank their employees for sharing their experiences and believe them. Like simply believe, even if you don't understand it, believe the experiences. Two, when we are sitting in that space of reflecting on the data, I think it's really up to leadership to take initiative and ask employees, is my interpretation of this data accurate, right? Because often what we see happen is that leadership is frustrated because they're saying, man, like we did XYZ thinking it would make everyone happy, but everyone is still mad. So what happened? And it's like, well, what you did actually wasn't getting at the core of the challenge, right? So there was a misinterpretation of the data, and as opposed to going back to the people and saying, "Are we understanding this correctly?" You jumped into developing some strategy and actions related to that challenge, only to essentially waste resources. And then, just emphasizing Janine's point, the third piece around this, again, once we are clear on interpretation, we've sat in this together, and we are beginning to prioritize, ensuring that employees are part of that prioritization, right? And throughout the implementation phase, employees are part of that. As challenges come up, as barriers come up, as Janine has said, employees are part of that. Hey, we're coming up against this challenge. Any ideas, any thoughts, and part of, as you emphasized, Rico, or maybe it was Janine, this is not meant to be on the shoulders of leadership only, but we're looking to leadership to model their commitment to it. So we want to see leadership, as we say internally as a team, like practice what we preach, right? Like we want to see our leadership model that and say these and really live into that. But the work is not meant to be on leadership shoulders alone, just like the work is not meant to be on those who are disproportionately impacted by it alone, right? So women of color, Black women should not be the only ones carrying this work, right? So if we're talking about collective ownership in the prioritization of things, we should also be very clear, what is leadership taking ownership over, and what are other employees taking ownership over? And I'm emphasizing ownership again, because if we are talking through this lens of supporting the leadership of Black women and women of color in the workplace, we need to ensure that the work that we're doing ultimately is cultivating their agency and their autonomy.
Yeah, and I think it goes, it bears repeating that one of the hallmarks of strong leadership is the ability to delegate and not to micromanage, right? So very difficult, I know for sure. And thank you for going into depth on that, Jennifer. There is
Hi,
another part.
John. By the way, I just want to say that.
John's following up again. So, can how data gets used lead to either organizational silence or have the experience lead to better employee engagement and trust? And for those of you who don't know, organizational silence is a phenomenon where essentially what happens is people speak up within their organization. They're not listened to. Perhaps this happens a couple times. And then eventually what happens is that person or multiple people, they stop contributing their ideas and spreading information within the organization, which can be a big, big problem. Janine or Jennifer, any thoughts on this?
I can add to that. I think in one of the things that John asked in his last question was around, literacy. And I think what the opportunity provides is like, oftentimes people aren't speaking the same language, right? Like leadership isn't speaking the same language as the direct, frontline employees. And one of the places where we have provided assistance is like being that translator and being the people that could come in and not be a part of that echo chamber of like, well, we did the thing and they didn't change. And, we have that ability as consultants, as people that are in the DEI space that are experts that can come in to bring that, outside opinion or outside eye to really illuminate what's going on. And when it comes to organizational silence, I think that's another part of it too. If you have that space where you have done the surveys, but you didn't listen, and you did the projects, but you didn't go back to the team and ask about the feedback if you were doing something wrong or if you were getting it wrong, then that leads to that organizational silence. And now that you have an opportunity to go back to the data, to go back to the conversations and talk to people, allowing yourself to do that in multiple ways. So there are surveys, there are discussions, there are options to bring in a consultant. There's also options when it comes to the management style, right? So thinking about employee engagement from the perspective of like, I am a manager. I meet with my person on a regular basis. Am I bringing in those opportunities for them to give their feedback in the one-on-one meetings I have with them every week?
Yeah, and I think, oh yes, John also says hi, everybody. So, hey, John.
Yeah.
I want to, this trust piece, because it's something that
Yeah,
comes up a lot amongst our clients. Is like, we're trying to build trust and we don't know how to build trust. And it's like, first of all, are y'all talking? Like, are y'all talking? You want to build trust? Like, are y'all talking? Like, do you understand the experiences that people are having? Right. Second thing is, as we've been emphasizing here, are you doing the things that you're saying you're going to do? Right.
right.
How do you build trust? You follow through, you practice what you preach. And that's what people want to experience. That's what people are expecting. And when it doesn't happen, that's when we threaten trust. That's when we break trust. Right. Also, we collected all this data. You had me sit in a focus group. You had me complete this survey that you said would take 10 minutes, but actually took me 30 minutes because I was trying to be intentional and really be reflective in my responses, and nothing came of it. Right. So when people share their experiences, what do we do with that data? Are we truly, do we demonstrate our commitment to equity by truly being equitable in our practices, policies, programs, all of the things, right? So you want to build trust, talk and do what you say you're going to do. It doesn't, there's more to that, but
Yes.
Good places to start, right? And I mean, like once you got trust, a lot of organizations also complain about a lack of engagement. Well, you're not going to engage with an organization that you do not trust, right? And so some of the numbers that we've looked at that are really striking is that according to some sources, the manager alone accounts for 70% of the variance in team engagement based on these three things: the manager's common habits, the manager's engagement with the employee, or another way of putting that might be their relationship, right? The employee's views of the manager's behaviors. So if it's the manager distributing an organizational survey, right, and there is not a good relationship between the team and this manager, well, I think we've all been in that position. Somebody tells us to fill out a survey. We're not engaged in that job with that manager, what have you. And so what happens to that survey? Good, fine, neutral, whatever, right? It's like I'm done in 30 seconds because I just straight up don't care, and that could be very much because I've observed that this manager also doesn't care and will not share the findings with me, or take my responses and do something fruitful. So I know that organizational life is hard. We have a lot of competing goals and everything, but what often gets lost in the sauce is that organizations are convened to do something more than an individual can accomplish on their own, right? And it's usually, unfortunately, market forces often steer us towards that's making money, and in many cases that's true, but often that's not entirely the full story there. So on this engagement piece, We're also touching on the employee experience a little bit here, and we don't have enough time to go fully into depth around what the employee experience is, but there's a lot of stuff that's been written about that. Or Janine, did you want to break in here?
Yeah, yeah. I feel really strongly about the fact that people don't leave, companies, they leave their managers, right? Like
Mm,
it's the one-to-one relationship that managers have with their employees that impacts that level of trust that you're trying to build within the organization. And if you aren't, just thinking about the employee experience, we have different phases, like the engagement phase, we have the development phase, we have the performance phase. And so in all of those phases, that's what's really going to get people to stay in your organization, to do their best work, to before, if they are growing and they decide that they've grown out of their role or the company, when they leave, they're actually telling people about the great experience and referring other people back to you. That's what you want. And I think today, when you think about who is in the workforce, often we think about the data around like millennials, right? Like
mhm.
our workforce is predominantly really growing in the millennial generation. That's also the most diverse generation. And what they expect out of the gate, the number one thing that's important to them is care and well-being. They're not like the baby boomers that were really thinking about like the financial stability of the company and all of those other things. They want to know that they have that psychological support. They want to know that you're thinking about helping them grow and develop. And so that all starts in those phases with your experience with your manager.
Mm.
Can
Yeah,
I just add to this care and well-being piece?
go for it.
The we all want to be cared for, right? It is a basic psychological need, as Janine mentioned. And so when I'm thinking about Black women and women of color in workplaces, I'm thinking about the fact that we want to be in a manager and employee relationship, and with our colleagues as well, but for sure with our direct manager, we want to be in a relationship where we are regularly met with care, attention, and the reinforcement of our sense of belonging. Those things don't exist, then I think you end up in a space that Janine's just mentioning, where you have a person not necessarily leaving the organization, like they love the mission and the work that's being done, but they're leaving their manager, right? Because without that type of relationship in place, I'm not able to show up as a whole person, right? And as Black women on a regular basis, I'm forced to be in places where I'm not recognized as a whole person, and to be in a workplace where I'm spending a whole lot of time where my entirety as a human being is not recognized or seen. That is not a place that I'm going to be able to thrive in, right? And so as a whole person, are you, as my direct manager, taking the time to check in on me, genuinely check in on me, beyond my responsibilities, beyond ensuring that I'm checking the things off the list that are tied to my job description? Do you know how I'm doing? Do how I'm feeling in terms of my health, my mental well-being, my spirit? Like, do you truly understand where I'm at? How I'm feeling in this moment, how I'm feeling in general, right? Like just, do you recognize me as a whole person, right? And I think that is a space that even going back to this, organizations pouring resources into the development of their managers, it's not just skill building around coaching, like I was emphasizing earlier. It's also like building one's empathy, building one's emotional intelligence, right? Building one's communication skills, all the skills that we talk about regularly, because you have to be able to connect with the people you are supervising in this way, right? we're all humans. No one's a machine showing up to work and doing the thing, right? And so are we met with care, attention, and the reinforcement of our sense of belonging is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a lot written about remote work and how for many people of various identities, it's actually been great because we don't have to necessarily deal with the challenges of, say, microaggressions or having to be in a physical space where there are these dynamics that, are not necessarily conducive to our well-being. There's also a lot of people who are complaining about the lack of returning to the office, which has had an effect. For example, I live in the Bay Area, and so downtown San Francisco and Oakland are both not really on the road to recovery because a lot of the tech workers are not returning to the office. But on the other hand, we also know that the tech industry is rife with there's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of extraction happening there, a lot of asking a lot from employees, but not really giving too much in return beyond material stuff, right? And so, what I'm driving at here is like, if we really want to ask a lot of our employees, then it's only fair, it's only reasonable that after so many decades of doing that, now employees are asking for more from organizations.
Absolutely.
And so, not to rise to that occasion is, of course, a choice, but I think the data is rather clear on that front, which way the winds are blowing. And I don't envisage them kind of blowing anytime soon. So, if you are an organization trying to figure out how to retain employees, how to promote employees, how to improve the employee experience, how to use your data to do that, well, Janine and Jennifer, what are some recommendations that we might be able to lay out there for people?
I think if you're thinking about it, this is a long game. You're not going to be able to change and measure things and thinking about data as like a checkbox one report that you did twice a year. This is something that you're going to have to do over time. It's going to be measuring the qualitative and the quantitative data. It's going to be trying to get support through a consultant or a diversity expert that can really help you find the story in the data and what it's saying about your organization and where your needs are. So making sure that you're thinking about this as like, this is a long game. It's not going to be like one report, one and done. It might not even be two reports or 2 years. It's really thinking about this from a perspective of like, we're doing this because we want to co-create culture over a period of time. And we're going to see that change in the way that we act, in the way that we change our policies and our processes. But it's really about that long game.
Thank you for that.
I mean, I don't have anything to add other than, again, coming back to the Black women experience. Like, we don't want to come into a workplace where we are daily surviving. Like, this is not about survival for us. I don't want to clock in and clock out and just literally feel like this is a game of survival. Like, I want to thrive, right? And I think everything that we've talked about thus far is about ensuring that women of color and Black women specifically can thrive, leveraging data to do that. So listen to us, hear us, validate us, affirm our experiences, and work collaboratively with us. I think that's how we thrive.
Well said.
Thank you so much for that. Before we do get out of here, I just wanted to mention to people watching that we do have a public dignity activity happening this Friday. So scrolling across the screen, if you can see that, that's this Friday, March 31st from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. ET. That's Eastern Time. Register at bit.ly/March Dignity. That's capital M, capital D, one word, March Dignity. Any final thoughts before we go?
Thank you for the conversation, both of you. I really appreciate just having the space to share this and to talk about it and to highlight women, especially as we're celebrating Women's History Month, and also Black women, as that is an experience that is mine. So thank you for allowing space for this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you,
Well,
Rika. Thank you, Janine.
thank you both. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll be replaying this at the beginning of next month as well. Until next time, this is Enrico Imanalo with Intentionally Act Live. Bye.
Bye.